Hi everyone, my name is Ahmed Hafiz. I'm an interactive media undergraduate student from New York University, Abu Dhabi. And although I can't be here in person, I'm more than happy to represent our team in presenting our research called Conchious, a tangible generative AI interface for embodied speculative futures. In this presentation, I'll take you through 3 different stages, beginning with the overview. Then we'll dive deeper into the technical side, and finally, we'll look at the conclusions on the findings and limitations of this research. First, imagine a future what-if scenario where the Persian Gulf was the first region to get submerged underwater to save people from the consequences of climate change. Set in 2080, the society is located in Amphitopia, a central hub underwater colony. This transition created a major gap in meaning between the older landborne generations who migrated and newer generations who have only known life underwater. Conchious is a tangible artifact that materializes the speculation through continuous interactions with the audience. So imagine you're a kid and you've been living underwater throughout your entire life, and then your grandpa says about the old days where there was something called the rain. Curious, you ask this conch, what is a rain? And it answers you with what it knows about the surface world and something called rain. In our research, we argue that embodying generative AI within physical speculative artifacts provides a compelling medium for context-aware experiential provocation. Our study intersects computational creativity, speculative design, and experiential futures. Traditional speculative design relies on static media, like film. We challenge this by physically embodying a generative AI into a tangible object, allowing the users to actively talk to the future rather than just look at it. We researched and created a future scenario based on the available design studies and engage participants with this artifact that is highly constrained to drive a dynamic foresight, which also makes the artifact as a conversational bridge to this future world. This is our artifact. It's a conch. It draws upon the historical and cultural significance of a conch as a communication tool and symbolic vessel of memory. It was created using a high-fidelity 3D scan of a conch, modified in Rhino 8, printed in Prusa, using a PLA material to integrate a hidden compartment to house the communication devices. As you can see on the left, underneath the conch, there is a wireless microphone and also a wireless speaker. We established a visual language using metallic silver spray paint to create an aesthetic tension between the organ texture that reminds us of its natural properties and the silver finish to extrapolate the mechanized and technological nature of this device. Finally, this was showcased in the campus end-of-the-year exhibition, where on the right side, we see how the device is displayed, and on the left is the web application interface where the users can see the dialogue and the interaction history. To keep our world logically sound, we use strategic foresight methods that is then used as a constraint for the AI's data. Then, we tested the artifact by deploying it directly into the homes of participants using anticipatory ethnographic study. From there, we can see how the interactions share emerging trends between humans and artificial intelligence. Next, let's deep dive into the technical side of things. To keep the interactions fast and conversational, we decoupled the hardware from the cloud. As you can see in this diagram, the web speech API captures the user audio in buffers. Then, a Flask backend orchestrates the logic and feeds it into OpenAI API GPT-4o Mini, as well as 11 Labs text-to-speech to synthesize an audio playback and text. For our world building, we begin with extrapolating current, early, often ambiguous macro trends that are indicators of emerging phenomena, We then used a causal mapping exercise to trace primary and secondary impacts of permanent sea level rise, which we then identify a deep sea cultural preservation and intergenerational memory gaps as design opportunities. Finally, we plotted these speculated futures along two key axes: the degree of submersion versus the level of cultural preservation into a 2x2 scenario matrix, meaning that the society fully moves underwater and that they value the importance of remembering what it means to live on the surface. Instead of giving the AI complete freedom, we use the previous narratives as a constraint. The responses are split into rigid structural format using three distinct segments: a definition of a surface concept, a contextualization of the deep sea life, and then engagement by closing it with a provocative question. This format forces the AI to use analogical reasoning and creative complex translations to execute its responses. Finally, we conducted an anticipatory ethnographic study where over a 24-hour period, we recruited 6 participants with diverse cultural backgrounds and gave the conch into their personal living spaces as an everyday object. Before interacting, participants attended a brief 10-minute session of world-building orientation. Then, they self-selected active roles within the underwater society, which are open-ended and encouraged to interpret to help them navigate through their new lives. And finally, we collected the data using mixed methods consisting of structured 3-part daily diaries of their interaction in the morning, midday, and evening, as well as semi-structured pre- and post-interaction interviews. Those interviews reveal 3 distinct categories in how participants interacted with the conch. The first group probed boundaries to destabilize the AI persona. The second group treated it as a highly context-sensitive advanced assistant, and the third group framed it as a genuine, immersive magical object from the future. We also noticed an ideological shift, where the system's persona consistently interpreted the submersion as a form of salvation from surface world suffering. Initially, participants accepted the stance but later recognized it as a rhetorical position, and all participants, as seen from Figure 2, agreed that based on their knowledge of real-world phenomena, the science fiction nature of Amphitopia was a plausible reality. And finally, if you look at Figure 1, through the emotional journey, we can see that the artifact did not produce sustained excitement, as it has downward trend after the interaction with the conch, but it induced a subdued form of reflective engagement at its conclusion. This is consistent with the function of speculative provocation rather than entertainment. So, what does this research tell us about? First of all, we have to acknowledge several limitations of the study. First is that we are using self-reported engagement data, which introduces potential biases that are linked to social desirability. Second, we are dependent on the LLM GPT-4o Mini, which has pre-existing training capabilities and lack transparency, meaning it's very difficult to distinguish whether this was the response from the AI or it was influenced by the constraint. Third is a lack of screen-based control group, which was intentional because we wanted to reduce the cognitive load of the participants in imagining this scenario. And finally, we have a constraint on the sample size and duration. However, this does not mean we did not find interesting findings. We found that restricting the large language model to a highly specific narrative persona avoids the generic drift and forces the AI into exploratory creativity. As mentioned previously, every query becomes a structural problem, requiring real-time analogical translation and perspective shifting to contextualize our world for the speculative underwater audience. And in the world of embodiment and situated creative identity, the physical form of the conch acts as a distributed cognition tool for speculative studies. The tangibility and presence grounds the speculative fiction naturally into the daily environments of the participants, meaning that they can imagine the future more vividly than before. And for future implications, the core message of Conchious is the boundaries of computational activity can be extended, demonstrating its potential as a creative medium for participatory foresight and cultural preservation. Although it's unfortunate that we cannot be in person to demonstrate the artifact to show it to you guys, thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and thank you for tuning in.